There's a debate raging in the automotive world that's been dividing mechanics for decades, and it's costing drivers thousands of dollars because nobody can agree on the right answer. The question is simple but terrifying. Should you flush a high-mileage transmission that's never been serviced? Or will that flush kill a transmission that somehow survived this long on ancient fluid? I've heard every theory imaginable over my 15 years in this business, from never flush high-mileage transmissions because you'll dislodge debris, to always flush because fresh fluid can only help. The problem is most mechanics are just repeating what they heard from someone else without any actual data to back up their claims. So I decided to settle this once and for all by running a real-world experiment that most shops would never attempt because the liability is too high. I acquired 5 vehicles with transmissions that had never been serviced and were sitting between 170,000 and 190,000 miles. And I flushed 3 of them while leaving 2 as controls. If you want to know whether that high-mileage transmission flush will save your vehicle or destroy it, subscribe to Car Care Xpert right now and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to reveal could save you from a catastrophically expensive mistake or show you how to rescue a transmission everyone else says is doomed. The theory that terrifies transmission owners. Let me explain the theory that's been scaring people away from high-mileage transmission flushes for years. The argument goes like this. When a transmission runs for 150,000 or 200,000 miles on original fluid that's never been changed, that fluid becomes contaminated with metal particles from internal wear, friction material from clutch packs, and various debris from normal operation. This contaminated fluid is doing a terrible job of lubricating and cooling, but the debris suspended in that old fluid is supposedly filling gaps and clearances between worn components, essentially acting like a liquid shim that keeps things working despite the wear. The theory claims that when you flush this high-mileage transmission and replace contaminated fluid with fresh, clean fluid, you wash away all that debris that was filling gaps, and suddenly worn components that were barely functioning with that debris now have too much clearance and start slipping or failing. The fresh fluid supposedly flows through gaps that thick contaminated fluid couldn't penetrate, finding its way into spaces where it causes problems rather than solving them. I've heard versions of this theory from mechanics I respect, and it sounds plausible enough that most people accept it without question. But here's what bothered me. It's based entirely on anecdotal evidence and speculation about what might be happening inside the transmission, with zero actual testing to prove the mechanism is real or that failure rate is actually higher after flushing versus not flushing. The experiment design and why it matters. I structured this experiment to generate actual data instead of relying on theories and anecdotes. I acquired 5 vehicles from auctions and private sellers, all with documented history showing 0 transmission services throughout their lives. 3 were Honda Accords with original transmissions around 180,000 miles, 1 was a Toyota Camry at 175,000 miles, and 1 was a Ford Fusion at 188,000 miles. All 5 transmissions were functioning, but showing signs of age, slightly delayed shifts, occasional harsh engagements, and fluid that was dark brown or black when I checked the dipsticks. I had 3 of these transmissions professionally flushed using a fluid exchange machine that removes approximately 90% of old fluid and replaces it with fresh manufacturer specification fluid. The other 2 vehicles received no service and were maintained as controls so I could compare failure rates between flushed and unflushed high-mileage transmissions. After the flushes, I drove all 5 vehicles identically, mixed city and highway driving, no extreme conditions, normal acceleration and braking, tracking mileage, and any transmission behavior changes weekly. I committed to driving each vehicle for 20,000 additional miles or until transmission failure, whichever came first, and documenting everything that happened. What happened to the flush transmissions? Here's where results get really interesting and challenge everything you've probably heard about high-mileage transmission flushes. Vehicle 1, a Honda Accord, received a complete fluid flush at 181,000 miles. The old fluid that came out was absolutely disgusting. Black, smelled burnt, and contained visible metal particles that sparkled in the light. I honestly expected this transmission to fail within a few thousand miles based on conventional wisdom. Instead, this transmission immediately improved in every measurable way. The shifts became noticeably smoother and more responsive. Harsh Ngai. What happened to the control group? Now let's talk about the two vehicles that received no transmission service and were maintained as controls with their original contaminated fluid. Vehicle 4 was a Honda Accord that started the test at 182,000 miles with fluid that was just as contaminated as the vehicles that got flushed. At 193,000 miles, just 11,000 miles into my testing, this transmission started slipping during the 2-3 upshift under moderate acceleration. Within another 2,000 miles, the slipping became severe enough that the transmission would rev without accelerating the vehicle. And by 196,000 miles, the transmission was completely failed and would only operate in third gear limp mode. This transmission died at 196,000 miles while running on its original contaminated fluid that was supposedly keeping it alive according to conventional wisdom. Vehicle 5 was the Ford Fusion that started at 188,000 miles, and this one made it slightly further, but still failed before completing my 20,000-mile test. At 202,000 miles, this transmission started exhibiting harsh shifts and occasional slipping. By 205,000 miles, it was slipping consistently and showing signs of impending complete failure. Both control vehicles with unflushed transmissions failed or were on the verge of failure before completing the test period, while all three flushed transmissions sailed through 20,000 miles without any problems whatsoever. Why the conventional wisdom is dangerously wrong. The results of this testing completely demolished the theory that flushing high-mileage transmissions causes failures. When mechanics see a transmission fail shortly after a high-mileage flush, they immediately blame the flush without considering an alternative explanation. The transmission was already failing before the flush, and the flush just happened to coincide with the failure timeline. Transmissions that have gone 150,000 or 200,000 miles without service are already operating on borrowed time with severely degraded fluid that's causing accelerated wear with every mile driven. These transmissions are in the process of failing whether you flush them or not, and the flush is often the last service they receive before the inevitable failure that was already in progress. This creates a false correlation where mechanics remember the flush followed by failure and conclude the flush caused it, when in reality the flush was a desperate attempt to save a transmission already dying from decades of neglect. My testing proves this by showing that flush transmissions actually perform better and lasted longer than unflushed controls, suggesting that fresh fluid helps even severely worn transmissions function better for their remaining lifespan. The critical factor nobody talks about. Here's what I discovered that completely changes the equation. The method of flushing matters enormously, and this is where many shops create the failures they then blame on flushing itself. Traditional transmission flushes using certain machines can create pressure spikes that dislodge large chunks of debris or force contaminated fluid into areas where it causes blockages. What I used was a fluid exchange system that connects to the transmission cooler lines and uses the transmission's own pump to circulate fluid, replacing old with new, gradually without pressure spikes. This gentler exchange method is far less likely to cause problems than aggressive flush machines that force fluid under high pressure through every passage in the transmission. Additionally, I use the exact transmission fluid specification required by each manufacturer rather than universal fluids that might have incorrect friction modifiers. Many shops use whatever universal transmission fluid they have in bulk to maximize profit margins. And using incorrect fluid absolutely can cause problems in high-mileage transmissions. When you combine aggressive flushing methods with incorrect fluid specifications, you create the perfect recipe for transmission problems that then get blamed on the concept of flushing rather than the poor execution of the service. What you should do with your high-mileage transmission. Based on everything I learned from this expensive experiment, here's my professional recommendation for anyone dealing with a high-mileage transmission that's never been serviced. If your transmission is currently functioning normally with no slipping, no harsh shifts, and no warning lights, get it flushed immediately using a proper exchange method with correct manufacturer specification fluid. The data proves that fresh fluid helps even severely worn transmissions operate better and potentially last longer, and delaying the service only allows additional wear to accumulate. If your transmission is showing minor symptoms, like slightly delayed engagement or occasional harsh shifts, the flush might improve these symptoms or it might not, but it's unlikely to make things worse if done properly with correct fluid. If your transmission is exhibiting major symptoms like consistent slipping or complete gear engagement failure, skip the flush and start planning for rebuild or replacement, because fresh fluid cannot fix mechanical failures that have already occurred. After spending $15,000 and driving 100,000 combined test miles, I can definitively say that the conventional wisdom about never flushing high-mileage transmissions is wrong and has probably cost people millions in premature transmission replacements that could have been delayed or prevented with proper fluid service. The theory sounds plausible, but the data proves it's not supported by real-world results when you actually test it properly. Every flushed transmission in my study performed better and lasted longer than the unflushed controls, proving that fresh fluid helps rather than hurts even severely neglected transmissions. If this video just saved you from avoiding a flush that could extend your transmission's life, or prevented you from wasting money on a flush that won't help a transmission that's already failed, hit that like button and share this with anyone facing this decision. Drop a comment telling me your transmission mileage and service history, because understanding where you stand helps determine the right course of action